All right, good morning everybody. Come and take your seats. How are we going with the live stream? Are we good? We're good. Fantastic. Good morning and welcome everybody to the Audit and Risk Committee on Wednesday 19th of February 2025. I can look to my left here and I can see that there are no apologies. And in terms of the health and safety briefing, I do know we have some externals. Yesterday we had a fantastic evacuation drill. Follow the person in front of you, very professional, and you'll get to the safe zone. This is going to be live streamed on YouTube, so be prepared for that. And friends, counsellors, colleagues, just remember the old mobile phones. So as I said, there's no apologies. I'm going to do the karakia, which I'll do now. Kia inoi tātou. This is typically a sung karakia, but as Councillor Baker's not here, I'll just say it. He honore, he kororia ki te atua, he mongorongo ki te whenua, he whakaro pai ki ngā tangata katoa. Hanga e te atua, he nākau, hau, ki roto, ki tēnā mātou. Whakatongia o wairua tapu, he awhina, he tohu I a mātou. Hei, ako hoki I ngā mahi mō tēnei rā, ameni. Amen. There's no public forum, no late items, no confidential business to be transferred into the open, no change to the order of business, any conflicts of interest? No. Let's get into business. Our first item today is the Audit New Zealand final results. And we have here Cherie Koval, please forgive the pronunciation, and Paul Davidson. How's that pronunciation, Paul? Very good. And we've got Leon Petersey. Is that good pronunciation?
Really good.
That was good. I tried to get my good sort of Afrikaans drawl, but I didn't quite nail it. So thank you very much, and over to staff for the presentation. Yeah.
Good morning. So we're bringing the final audit report from Audit New Zealand. This was on the audit of our 2024 annual report. We've got Leon here who will speak to it as well, but I thought I would just cover the 3 new recommendations in the report, let Leon speak, and then we can take questions together. I've also got our financial accounting team here as well, in case there's some really niggly technical questions that you want to dig into. So 3 new recommendations this year. One is on Audit's request for us to obtain independent accounting advice on complex transactions. So in the past few years we have entered into a few quite complex transactions which we've engaged PwC to review our accounting treatment and confirm with the audit technical team down in Wellington whether or not that is correct, and we've managed to land positions each time on everybody being happy. Going forward we will potentially still need to do this, but we will assess the situation, assess the materiality of the transaction, the significance, and potentially bring that to council to approve the unbudgeted expenditure that would be incurred on that independent accounting advice, and highlight the risks of doing so or not doing so. The second new item is the provision of additional contract information in association with revals that happen each year. So that's providing contract rates and more detail around the assumptions around the revaluation. So we've worked with our valuers and our asset management teams to pull this all together last year, and going forward we'll do this and provide that information to audit when they come in the door for the final audit. The last recommendation was providing support to our CCOs to make sure that they meet their statutory deadlines. We have quite good contacts with the finance teams and the CCOs. We're not currently resourced to provide staff in there to do their accounts, and they have that resourcing, but we do support in any way we can with our technical accountants and just giving flex on time frames and stuff like that. I believe that this has probably arisen because BVL this year tipped into a new tier of reporting, which put a lot of pressure on their finance team to get across the line in time for us to be able to consolidate audited accounts into our annual report. So we'll keep working with them and making sure that we all hit those deadlines. So those were the 3 new recommendations. There are some old ones in there as well, which we've provided management comments on in the audit report. I'll hand over to Leon and then we can take questions together.
Thanks, Cherie. Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Tēnā koutou katoa, councillors and staff. So first of all, I think Cherie stole my thunder. She said everything I was going to say, explaining the 3 new recommendations. So I'm not going to work through the whole report again, rather take questions. I just want to say 2 things. The one is in the report I mentioned how good the delivery was, quality of information last year during the audit. This is definitely one of my better experiences of external audit. It's really nice to get information of a good quality early in the piece. And the second thing that I noticed, there are 10 outstanding recommendations. That may seem a lot. I don't think it's that bad for an organisation of this size. So I think your management and staff are doing a really good job. From this perspective, I can't recommend raises and so forth, but I just think they are doing a good job. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Look, thank you very much. Any questions from the committee members? Any questions from the remainder of the committee? Mayor Drysdale.
Just on the complex transactions, is it feasible that we actually just enter much simpler contracts going forward? Is that feasible?
Yes and no. Those transactions normally will come to council in terms of getting your input in terms of what they're undertaken for a reason. It's fair to say that we would prefer them to be simpler transactions, but some of the things that we've tried to do to enable infrastructure to be built, for example, have required some non-vanilla treatments effectively, which has made that complex. So I think the answer is that we certainly don't intend to make them complex, but to get the outcome we try and achieve, we do end up in certain situations with some complexity that does need to be worked through.
Thank
Good.
Further questions? Okay, I'll fill in. Looking for that. In terms of those complex contracts, and this is a question to you, Mr. Auditor, early contractor engagement is one of the things that we discussed yesterday around a transportation project, and that's a known methodology in terms of entering into contracts. But would something like that meet the threshold of what you're talking about, or are we talking about things that are more complex or more bespoke?
I'm not sure about which contract you're referring to when you talk about the transport one. The ones we were looking at, the Marine Precinct, that was one where you've got deferred and delayed settlements and so forth. The same with the head office, where there are some interesting provisions within the contract, and that triggers a certain accounting treatment. But it could, those are more the things. And also, if we're talking about a transaction of $1 million, although it may be complex, that's not material from my perspective, and I don't believe from council's perspective to get accounting technical advice. That'll cost you money, because I do understand these things cost money. It'll be in the highly complex material cases.
Councillor Schooler.
Thank you. Just and thank you for the report and the introduction. So just in terms of materiality, you've said $1 million's not material to seek external advice. Where does your materiality sit, please?
Ma'am, I'll have to refer to my audit plan from last year. Seeing that we're online, I don't want to make wrong comments.
The Chief Executive has a comment just while you're finding that.
Sure.
Maybe of assistance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think a really good example of one of those complex transactions was the treatment of the land at Willow Street, where it was in council ownership, and through a transaction, quite a complex transaction, that had where a number of things needed to be considered, was the fact that that now's moved into co-ownership. And so how does that transaction occur? How's it treated from an audit perspective, GST, setting up a company? I think that was a good example of a lot of work that had to go in for a long period of time afterwards to satisfy both council and the auditors that we were treating it appropriately.
Yeah, thank you, Chief Exec, and I agree with that. Ma'am, our materiality is 12 million.
Another question, you mentioned the work done on Marine Precinct. Can you just talk through the complexity of those transactions, please?
I'm hesitant to talk about it, seeing that there are some complexities, and it is legal proceedings happening with that, isn't it?
Yes. Through the chair, that's correct.
But I think if I can maybe start the conversation there, I think it's the fact that it's over a multi-year deferred payment effectively is what created the complexity in there. So I think we can talk about that. That's okay.
Well, that's exactly it. I'm not sure I can add more to that.
Thank you.
Any further questions on this item, Mayor Drysdale?
Yeah, just around the revaluations, and obviously that's something that has come up in the report. You know, is what we're doing is that quite standard across local body councils? You know, and is it just that it's such a big quantum that's brought you concern?
Oh yeah, I don't have any concerns, to be honest with you. It is across the whole sector, and everyone is doing the same thing, applying the same methodology, etc. However, we found that not everyone's data was all up to date, so that's why we've worked with management last year to get contract information, recent contract information, to support the valuer's assessment, and that's what we're going to do going forward. So, yep, it's the quantum as well. It was a big number on your balance sheet.
A question from me. I know there's some actions which are not urgent, but necessary. Are there any from your perspective, Mr. Peterson, as an auditor, that you think that we should have addressed by now? Because I know there's some things that are taking some time, but is there anything that causes you any, concern is a strong word in the audit world, but anything that causes you an moment or aha moment?
No, Mr. Chair, I wouldn't say so. No.
Okay, I don't detect any further questions, so we'll move to the resolution, which is on page 8 of the agenda for those following at home. If we have a mover for that, I guarantee that I will second it. Moved by Mayor Drysdale, seconded by myself. Is there any debate? The only thing I would say in response to the motion is an acknowledgement of the auditor's statement at the beginning that he was provided with good quality advice early, and so my compliments to the organisation for that. That's quite good coming from Audit New Zealand, because they are not competing for our business, so thank you very much for that. Any further speakers? Councillor Schooler.
I just was going to say that there is a comment, and I'm not sure which page it is, that there was a satisfaction with the financial statements, and that I think is a really good comment, and that I would have put in the executive summary as a to help us understand how good the reporting. And the other comment, I think, just to say from our perspective, or my perspective, having the interim report with the auditors in December, I think it was a very good update for us. So, but well presented, thank you.
Okay, I'll now put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. I declare it carried. Let's move now to the next item on our agenda, which is on page 42. And it relates to the Audit and Risk Committee proposed forward work plan. We have Chris Smith, Chris Quest, James Woodward and Alistair McNeil from Tauranga City Council staff presenting to this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll quickly introduce the function of risk to the committee, and then I'll let the folks take over. The purpose of the risk and assurance function is to identify, assess and help reduce risk that could hurt the business. And so you're going to meet a number of different folks through this meeting. And from here I'll hand over to Smithy and James to kick us off.
Kia ora koutou. Just a headline there. I'm called Smithy because my direct line manager is Chris Quest. So it makes it a little confusing if we're going Chris and Chris. Unfortunately, Chris isn't here. He's on holiday, so I have James here by my side. So a little bit about me. I started with Council in September last year. I have a risk, business continuity and emergency management background. What that means for the organisation is that I support a specified portfolio utilising newly embedded enterprise risk management solutions, which is the CAM software. You'll hear a little bit more about that today. In a similar vein, review and support the continued development of the business continuity management system. I also sit on the steering committee of the Government Continuity Reference Group. That's an AOG membership. Which involves continually scanning the horizon for best practice in the field. And then my other passion is emergency management, which I pivot to support too if we stand up a response. So I'm here today to propose a forward work plan for you to consider. Part of that is pivotal to that is establishing a risk appetite, which is set by resolution of the Council, which would also inform any deep dives that you would like to conduct. I take the report as read and open to any questions.
Questions from members of the committee? Questions from other colleagues, including those in the public gallery? Councillor Schooler.
Mightn't be a question. No. So just thank you for that, and just your comment was that we are needing to set the risk appetite, and I've made a comment in the reading the document. There is quite a lot of important discussion on risk appetite, which isn't actually noted in the recommendation, and I think it's quite an important part of, as you've just highlighted, that it is quite an important part. And so I guess the steps of how we as a council, as elected members, do establish that risk appetite, it wasn't clear to me when that happens, other than it sort of happens through their work plan. But it's a conversation I would like for all council, just because we do need to, that's not just setting it for here, it's setting it for how we govern going forward. So I'll put it into a question. So are there specific workshops we do that guide us towards those decisions, and when does the whole council come into those discussions?
And thank you for the question, great question. So yes, it is in the forward work plan in terms of setting the risk appetite, which is set by yourselves. One recommendation is the waiting perhaps for the appointment of an independent chair to help guide those conversations, but it is forming a workshop for you then to understand what the council appetite would look like, and then going up for a resolution at full council would be a recommendation. So we're sitting there with a proposal workshop in May to come together to have that conversation.
Mayor Drysdale.
Obviously, currently you're working on a risk appetite from previous council. Can you give us a indication of where that risk appetite currently sits?
Great question. Thank you. There has been no resolution of risk appetite by previous council. This will be our first.
Councillor Schooler, and then I'll go to Councillor Taylor.
So it was in a very similar vein. So how, if there isn't a resolution and we're going to put a resolution, under what risk appetite is the organisation sitting at the moment?
We have a working...
Yeah.
I can leave that one too.
I mean, it's a common sense one. The organisation has a range of different delegations across procurement, finance. We are operating under a lot of previous resolutions that give us broad direction, and there's a very, we're conscious that you're a newly elected council, and that anything that we would be uncomfortable making a decision, despite the fact that we might have delegation to do so, we would go through a process of checking in with you in the first instance, and if necessary, getting formal resolutions from you to proceed with any initiative or expenditure. So,
Do you want to follow that up?
I do. Which is great, and I think that's what we would probably expect. I guess it's just, was it just missed by the previous councils, or is this a new thing? We've got a new person saying we need to establish our risk appetite. Where does that? I'm a bit unsure now.
Smithy might disagree with me, but I don't know that this is an exact science, and that you can create general frameworks and guidelines around this.
If I may, through the chair. So we do have an established framework, a risk framework that is inputted into this enterprise risk management solution, the CAM software, that risk owners, general managers, tier 3s, will use their best knowledge of the risk that is being presented and the treatment of that risk. Then there's just an algorithm that is used, consequence times likelihood, and it gives it a rating. So there is an element of subjectivity, but based on subject matter experts in the field that is managing that particular risk. So yes, there's a framework, but as Marty has alluded to, anything that is deemed to be of concern would come up through the appropriate channels.
Councillor Schooler, then the Mayor.
So great to hear. So in terms of that, what's coming out of the system, which after the algorithm's done her business, are there a certain level that would come to this committee if they exist?
Yes, we have that on the agenda. I think it's the last agenda item today, where we'll show you what she spits out, what she provides as what the algorithm shows.
Right, so that's how that's
coming through.
Okay,
that's right.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Drysdale.
So I guess from coming into the organisation, and with good reason, I think with some of the disasters that had happened, I'd say that TCC is extremely risk adverse. Would you agree with that assessment, or am I not quite reading that right?
Me, Mahe, that's an opinion, and I'm not prepared to discuss that in a public forum. I would suggest that the organisation is well placed, from my opinion, from what I've seen, remembering I am fairly new to the organisation, September of last year.
Smithy, if I may call you Smithy in a formal setting. In your experience, what's best practice look like for a council determining its risk appetite?
Great question. In my opinion, it is actually having a facilitated session with subject matter expert, and I point to, again, best practice from the Auditor of the Office General, which is their independent chair, to facilitate and lead those conversations. I can't speak on your behalf and what your appetite looks like.
And would that be formalised through policy? It'd be a long policy, but would that be formalised through policy somehow?
Absolutely. I refer to in the report to a section 5.2, I believe, from memory. Therefore, once you set your risk appetite, that goes up for resolution by the full committee. And then what we do with that information is input it into our enterprise management system solutions, and then the benchmarking comes forthwith. So anything that then is not within appetite will come up for you to discuss. Hope that answered your question.
It sure does. No, that's fantastic. Any further questions from committee? Councillor Schooler.
So just, can we ask questions on the, are we still on the work programme? Yes, yeah, okay. So I've just had a, we, as Mayor Mahe has alluded to, we have arrived with a few legal issues to contend with, and I just would like to see in the work plan a deep dive into the way we manage legal risks, including the strategy to manage the legal requirements across the organisation. And I didn't think that was a specific. I'd like that to be a deep dive, please.
We can certainly make that our first deep dive. I think the other point is we have a standing report that the General Counsel will bring to full council going forward. Historically it would come to risk and audit, but just given the nature and the importance of those risks, we're thinking that if it goes to full council, all councillors get good visibility of those issues. But the deep dive itself could be this group or a subset of the councillors.
Mayor Drysdale.
Yeah, I guess I agree with that and think that's very sensible. I think that same report should also come to the Audit and Risk Committee, and I say that because I think this committee would look at it differently from council, and council is looking at it from effectively an update and understanding where we're at, whereas I think we would view it at this committee more as our from a risk perspective and how we deal with that risk potentially going forward. So I think it would be a good thing, and I do notice it's in here as the litigation report. I think it would be good to have it both opportunities.
Chief Executive to respond.
Thank you, Chair. So just I agree that the litigation report that is proposed to go to council should also come to here. But if I understand Deputy Mayor correctly, it's more understanding what the process of us managing, responding, the legal issues as they arise and as they proceed. Is it as much around the process and
in terms of the deep dive, yes. So I think they're two different conversations. I think I'm very agree very much with Mayor Mahe, but I think it's the process of, and I think there's been a change in the legal team here. We're not as aware of it as we might be, and with the number of legal issues we have, it just would be good to know understand the process and accountability, and how that fits in the organisation. So yes, two different things, but obviously the topic of the report will be good case studies to actually have in the deep dive in terms of that process. So thank you for the question.
No further questions. Okay, I'd like to thank you, staff, and I'd like to turn the committee to page 42. As I said before, if one of the committee members moves it, I will second it.
Could we add subject to a deep dive on how to manage legal risk? Do you want to add that to the work programme?
Does that need to be dealt with by formal resolution, or if staff have got the message on that one?
it's noted?
Okay, it's noted. No, we've got it. Thank you. So moved, that's on page 42, moved by Mayor Drysdale, seconded by myself. Any debate on that? Any discussion from wider colleagues? The only thing I would say in response to the resolution is, whilst Audit and Risk is a committee of the part, I think in terms of the workshop around setting risk appetite, I think it would be good, and I think everybody would agree with the expectation that the full council is invited to and participates in that workshop. Councillor Taylor, I'll allow you to speak in debate.
Sorry, I'm getting out. Kia ora. It'd just be useful, I think, if there was a 2-page summary or something just on what's currently happening before we went to the workshop.
Okay. Has that been noted by Exec? Thank you very much. Okay, no further debate. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I declare that carried. Let's now move to the next item on our agenda, which is the insurance update. On page 46, and we have Fraser Smith, Kat Mills, and changing exec members now to Paul Davidson, and we have a PowerPoint presentation with this. For those following at home, we're on page 46.
Sorry, good morning. Yes, just put together a few slides just to, I guess, give you a bit of a flavour for what's happening. So the first one is, sorry, I can't see what's on the board. The first one is there just showing a bit about how we sit within the risk management process, just to give you a bit of a context. So you've got that risk management cycle there. So insurance comes around in the risk mitigation sort of part of the process. And if we go to the next slide, within that, there's a number of risk mitigation strategies that you can have in terms of dealing with those risks. And so insurance sits in there in terms of number two, in terms of the risk transfer. So insurance is basically a process of, in terms of the risks that council have identified, it's basically transferring a chunk of that risk to another party, which is the insurance company. So that's just give you a feel for where insurance sits within that risk management process. And basically it's kind of a gamble. We pay the insurance company a certain sum of money, and if something goes wrong, then they kind of ride into the rescue in most cases. Okay, next slide. Okay, that's just really trying to give council a feel. Insurance is very much a global, you don't have to look at the detail of that. That was just to kind of demonstrate. Though it is interesting, it's talking in there US $120 billion worth of damage across the world in 6 months. So it's kind of showing you that the enormous events, predominantly natural events that are happening, that are having huge impacts in terms of the insurance market. And it has, over the last quite a few years, meant that insurance premiums have just really been skyrocketing. You'll probably all know it in terms of your own properties and things like that. Insurance costs have been going up massively. So within council, we've had that around the world impact, and then we've also had a double whammy impact because our valuations have been going up. In terms of the bulk of our assets, the valuations have been going up like 10% per year. For quite a few years now, or higher. So with the insurance rates going up and our valuations increasing, our insurance costs have just exploded. My understanding is that the global market is starting to turn in terms of there is more capacity because the prices have gone up. When prices go up, more people come into the market. So what's happening is those prices are starting to turn, but as yet we haven't seen the change in our valuations. So I think for the year we've just negotiated, which started in November, we had almost flat level of actual premium per dollar sort of increases, but our valuations were still going up massively, so our insurance costs went up quite significantly, but there's a hint of a bit of a turn there. In terms of the Pacific region, which we're part of, it would make up less than 10% of the worldwide premiums, and that Pacific region includes Japan, Australia and New Zealand. So in terms of the amount of influence that we have over is extremely minimal. For many, many years, we kind of sat below the radar in terms of we were just this little pocket of the world that the insurance companies didn't really care about because nothing happened. And then 2011, we had the Christchurch earthquakes and you had the Japanese tsunami. And all of a sudden they realised, hang on, we've got a bit of a risk down in the bottom of the world down here. And so they've significantly more attention is being paid, and as part of also the impacts on the premiums, things like that have also been kind of influenced through that sort of process. And the last bit in there, and I think it's in the report, but yes, we do. So while we have little influence on premiums and that sort of stuff directly, we do purchase our insurance as a block through BOPLAS, which is the whole, all the councils in the region. So that does give us quite a big impact in terms of conglomerating that asset level. So while we get individual premiums for this organisation, and they're tailored to us in terms of when we go out to the market, that's all done as a block in terms of to try and keep that premiums level as low as we can. Sorry, next slide. So that's just a nice big picture there. So one of the biggest things that we've done in the last year is have a look at our underground assets. So we've got a couple of billion off the top of my head of underground assets in terms of the three waters we're talking about. And we, at the moment, we only insure those, we only have the ability to insure those for basically disaster events. And so what we've done, we have a $380 million limit on that at the moment. And we did quite a bit of exercise to go through and refresh that $380 million limit in the last 12 months. It covers three waters, only emergency damage. It's also based on the fact that the Crown, we're expecting the Crown to fund 60%. If we have a disaster here, that we're expecting the Crown to come to the party for 60% of the damage. That was always kind of a bit up in the air, but the Christchurch earthquakes did sort of solidify that. So that's that's pretty dependable in terms of getting that. So our insurance covers the 40%. Basically, the insurance premium is to cover the 40% of that remaining $380 million. What they do for this is they take all of our asset management data and the GIS data and the soil mapping and things like that we've done across the council, and they put that into their models, and they basically put earthquakes, floods, all that sort of stuff through that thing and see what breaks. And so it's done at a really, really detailed, component asset level, and it's done. They run this simulation thousands, millions of times and they see what breaks each time. And through that whole process, you get a feel for how much damage is actually likely to happen. I just would like to add a note in there. It was really interesting when we were talking to the people that had been doing this report. The lady kind of came back and said, "We love working with Tauranga's data." It's a kind of a shout out to the asset management people and the GIS people and all those that do that stuff. We have really good data. This lady does work for lots of different councils and organisations, and she was super impressed with what we had. So that's just a bit of a thing I wanted to throw in there. The next slide, is just the same stuff, the point assets. So it's only really the underground stuff we're talking about, but we still do have quite a lot of point assets underground, and sort of some of the pumping stations and that sort of stuff, particularly in terms of the wastewater. A lot of those are below ground. The next slide is just really a picture of, in terms of the disasters that happen, the one that has the most impact on TCC or the most likely damage is earthquake. So it makes up about probably 70% of the premium pool we pay, of the premium we pay on this. So earthquake is the one that's likely to do the most damage, and you can see that the Hikurangi subduction zone there is the place that most likely earthquakes are going to be based from, and in terms of the risk that we're getting, have a major event here, and that's the area it's coming from. And then the next slide, if we can throw that should throw up the summary of the results that we had from that testing. So it basically shows when they've run all those through loads and loads of times, we have a $300 million limit. So you can see on that, even if we hit even a 1 in 1,000 year event, we're still basically saying we're even at the the kind of extreme end of the damage being done, which is that last column, we're still kind of under that the limit that we've got of the expected damage. So that gives us a lot of confidence that in terms of what we've got, that the current limit that we've got is really good. The next step, which is being looked at the moment, is for the rest of the Botplas councils to go through and get do similar modelling, so we can check, because there's a $500 million limit for the entire region, and so to make sure that $500 million limit still looks okay. So that is something that is being discussed at the moment, and that being talked through with the other Botplas councils to try and get them to sort of come up with the funds to actually go ahead with that. So that's that part. And then just wanted to quickly talk about the public liability professional indemnity cover. So that's on our legal in terms of it getting sued. And the biggest part there we have is through the professional indemnity cover, which is where we have professional judgment, and that is where we have that risk, particularly around the Building Act and the all the stuff that's been happening with leaky buildings and that sort of thing. So there's two layers to this cover. We have the first primary layer, which is a $15 million cover, and that is in place for every claim that we have, and that sits underneath, and then there's an excess layer on that, takes it from 15 million to $160 million. So we do have a really high level of cover if that was needed. That $160 million is a shared level of cover with other councils, but I can't even imagine getting anywhere near that sort of level. So we do have a really, really high level of cover. It has been really expensive insurance, particularly through the Building Act stuff. It's just been going up significantly year on year. And the other thing that's come in just this year on the $15 million base level, a new thing has come in terms of $45 million total limit amongst a group of about 36 councils. So if that all gets used up before Tauranga had a claim, then we would potentially miss out on part of the 15 million. That came about because there was a chunk of councils that initially got no cover at all last year. Botplas was not part of that group, but there was a group of councils that got refused cover initially, and that was the compromise that came through in the end, is this to actually enable councils to come in, and it also then for this year it got imposed on Tauranga as well as part of that process. So that's kind of how that came about. So that's basically the presentation I've got. So just really, if anybody had any questions about that or the paper.
Thank you. Any questions of committee? Mayor Drysdale.
Thank you for the presentation, and it's great to hear around the data we have, especially for waters, etc. That is being useful in this this context. So what we've heard is the rapid increase in insurance, and I think Botplas sounds like it's certainly been beneficial. The insurance companies seem to be grouping effectively, if you look at a lot of that, pretty much most of the councils around the country. So a two-pronged question. Firstly, is there bigger scale that we could go, we could insure with a wider group than Botplas and drive savings, because it seems like the insurance companies are grouping us anyway and putting us together. And secondly, there's 80 councils around the country. If we're all having the same issues with insurance, have we looked at a self-insurance mechanism where as a country or centrally we actually run our own insurance, and just interested in hearing those.
Okay, good questions. So the first part that you had in terms of your wider group of councils. So that kind of 36 councils, although we go out as a BOPLAS and we get a thing, they do kind of market us through with a much bigger range of councils than just the BOPLAS. So yes, we do work with, like MWLAS and quite a few of the other councils. So I think it's about 36 in total. But having said that, that does exclude Christchurch, Auckland and Wellington. And kind of I don't know that we would benefit by specifically having them in a group, because they all have quite specific issues around insurance and that sort of stuff. So that's a bit of a question mark whether expanding it further would, as I think we've kind of expanded as much as is logical without including those three big councils with quite different insurance needs. That would just be an opinion. The second part of your question in terms of have we ever done mutual funds, yes, there has been quite a lot of it in the past. Risk pool, which is referred to in the document, was exactly that in relation to public liability professional indemnity cover that existed when it became not possible at all to get. So that's why it was set up in the first place. So that was set up. It worked quite successfully for a while, and then what happened is the market kind of changed quite a bit, and it actually became, first of all, from our perspective, that was kind of when the leaky building claims all started to happen around then. And also, kind of interestingly, it was also the time that all of a sudden the market came back again. And so Tauranga, like quite a lot of the other councils, had a look at that, and we made a decision at the time to kind of pull out of risk pool. We're still on the hook for claims that happened over the period. I would have to say, on the whole, probably for Tauranga in particular, that risk pool was actually pretty good. We probably actually received way more money than we actually ever paid in premiums into that group. It is something that could potentially be looked at again. Another thing that did exist was LAPP, which is the Local Authority Pipe Protection Scheme, which was exactly the same kind of thing as I was just talking about in terms of it was for emergency damage. That also fell by the wayside when the market came to play. So what tends to happen with those is they work quite well for a while, but they kind of working because we have, there's not too many claims. As soon as you get claims, it then becomes a big bun fight and everyone tries to run away and things like that. So we have found that you actually can get, in general, better savings by going through the professional insurance, by the market-led insurance if it's there. Having said that, it's always a good thing to look at, and it has been raised again a few times about recreating a national insurance group to do a bit of look at that self-insurance and that sort of stuff. It keeps not getting legs in terms of that, councils can't quite commit to actually doing it. Tauranga has been quite involved in the past in some of those, trying to put some of those schemes together, and we continue to talk to interested parties and that sort of stuff. I think I talked to people at Wellington a couple of months ago to see where it was going, because they're kind of leading the latest charge on doing something like that. But at this stage, it kind of is going nowhere.
Just following on from the same vein around self-insurance, what's our mechanism or your routine in terms of determining when we should be applying self-cover? And it's kind of separate from the risk appetite discussion that we're going to have as a workshop, but what's what's the internal mechanism for determining whether this is potentially something we could self-cover? I'm just thinking like ACC premiums, ACC's accredited employer program. Tauranga City Council now has over 1,000 staff, so it's kind of viable, and particularly if you include the CCOs within that, it'd be an interesting.
I believe TCC is already part of the ACC And I believe I don't know the details on it, but I don't think we're even the bottom grade on it. But I don't know if there's anyone here that can specifically answer that.
No, we can find out.
But it is my I'm not the right person to ask, but I do believe we are part of that accredited employee program.
I'll just Google it. It's pretty quick. So. In terms of setting that insurance appetite, though, in terms of the amount of self-cover, what's the team's mechanism for?
There is no mechanism. I would suggest that is strongly part of the this group's mandate, and as part of the work that you're doing would be to actually say if you want to have a look at that. As I say, it has been in the past. Sorry.
One of the things you could consider is if you have a risk appetite workshop, consider inviting your broker. So your risk transfer calculation against the risk appetite that you have, if you have someone who understands the market, they can advise you whether you accept it or transfer it at the same time as discussing it. So that could be an option when you have a chair and when you make a start on that.
An anecdotal one I would just put onto that is, in actual fact, Taupo, in terms of the underground cover, Taupo up till now has been self-insuring on that, and they have just come back and requested to come back into the BOPLAS group in relation to that. So it does give me, I say, very anecdotal, but it does give me some hint that maybe the insurance levels that we've got aren't awful.
Quick Google, yeah, we're not on the list on ACC's website as an accredited employer. But other questions from committee? Councillor Score.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. Just in terms of that 15 million public liability cover, it probably seems quite low. And then there was also we restricted to 45 million. So where did the 15 million come from, please?
It's basically driven by the market. That was kind of what we were able to get. As I said, if we had a claim, if we do have a claim that's over $15 million, there is the top-up cover that takes it up to 160. So we actually have 160. So when we have had claims over the $15 million limit, we have gone through to that backup cover and had those claims fully covered.
Thank you. I've got a few if I may.
Just run with
yeah,
it,
go for it.
So just again with looking at when you get to the stage where self-insurance is necessary and how you think about that, it would be really good to have a list of what we've paid in premiums and what we paid out, maybe because we probably need to go back 5 or 6 years. Nothing under $1 million. We don't need the little ones, but just to give it, I don't have a flavour for what we're paying and what we're getting back. So that would be really good to come back at the next meeting if we could have that, please.
No problem. We already have the premium set out per year anyway. So
Yes, you did talk about how good your data was, so I didn't think it was going to be too much. Then there's a question I had on page 55. You, I think, make a comment that on the risk pool, there's a comment that there's a payment that still may be needing to be made on the risk pool. Can you give us a quantum of that, please?
I'm afraid I can't. Marty maybe is involved with risk pool, so he may be able to give me more detail, but my understanding is that hasn't been settled yet, so there is no dollar value for that, and we would only pay our portion of whatever that final claim was.
Thank you. It's a very good question. I'll answer this as diplomatically as I can because it's subject to a board decision made this week, and we could expect, I think, to know by the end of this month what that quantum is. But probably about 18 months ago, there was a $15 million call on the members, of which there were about 70 members, local authorities at the time. And I think at that call, our portion of that call was it 160,000?
100 and something.
203.
203,000. This call is likely to be substantially lower than that. So.
And is that budgeted?
No. not specifically. So
that raises a second question, that if we do have a potential risk of a payment required, I would normally have expected that to be budgeted, or at least put in a forecast, or so that we were aware of it. That's not what we don't want to find. That comes in as a where would it get charged?
It would be charged through insurance cost within there. That's right. We do also have a risk reserve that we've used over for unexpected events that currently hasn't got funds in it, but that is one mechanism that we've been able to use for unexpected events in the past.
yeah, there's actually a note in the annual report identifying this as a liability, an unknown liability, and it's a standard clause that every member of risk pool, of which it's the majority of local authorities, have in their annual report as well. So
I'm still going.
Yeah,
sorry,
go for it.
mate.
No, keep going. Microphone.
So just on motor vehicle insurance, there is a comment here and later on that it looks like we cover BVL and Bay Venues, and I think later on Tauranga Art Festival, or Tauranga Art
Gallery. Tauranga Art Gallery.
That one. Can you confirm that they are recharged for those insurance premiums, please?
Those are specifically recharged. So when we get the invoice, there's detailed schedules for every asset. So we specifically take those schedules and extract those bits for for the buildings and that sort of stuff, and the vehicles, and then we have specific covers for the fine arts and the directors and that sort of stuff. They all get specifically recharged back to the CCOs.
Fantastic, thank you. And just it does raise on motor vehicles, I have no concept of what our motor vehicle costs are for this organisation, and therefore and whether we lease or buy. Can we, so separately to insurance, could we get some sort of quantum of where that cost is for us, please?
Yes, we can bring that back. Also to note that our pool has changed quite a lot, or our fleet has changed quite a lot over the last few years, particularly with city ops coming online. So we are looking at doing a review of that, how we actually fund and operate that fleet as well.
Right, so what status quo would be really good before and after we brought city ops in. Thank you. And I've got another one on page 56 on life assurance cover. I understand it's a benefit that is provided to staff. It's probably something that is for most certainly younger people is perhaps not seen as, yay, I'll go and work for Tauranga City because they provide life assurance, and there are certainly ways that that can be done differently than paying an insurance up front. So can I just understand the quantum of the premium, and again over 5 years what quantum over 5 years we paid and what have we paid out? Is that actually working for Tauranga City?
So the total premium over the last 5 years is just over 700,000, and we have paid out to employees, or now ex-employees, about 400,000.
And again, for me, Mr. CEO, this is something that I would like your view as we go forward in terms of employee benefits. Is this something that is sensible to continue being added to? I think all people who are working 15 hours or more at council, these are things that are potentially nice to have, and obviously you can't take it off people that have it in their contract, but going forward that could be something that, it's a 700,000 over 5 years, is it? Is quite a significant sum. Is that something that is sensible to carry on, or can be looked at?
Yes, well, I mean, we can look at that, and quite happy to have a conversation about what that looks like into the future.
Does it have to be done as a fringe benefit tax?
Yes. It is in our FBT regime.
Okay, so it's also got admin of FPT regime, which are really administrative heavy as well. Okay, thank you. Oh yes, so sorry, last question, Mr. Chair. We've got some insurance for standing timber and forestry. That just made me curious how much standing timber we actually have.
It's about 72 hectares. So it's around the water it's protection around the water treatment catchments. That's the word. So it's a mixture of, I understand, exotic and pine, mostly pine. And they keep that there. It's predominantly there for erosion purposes, but they do mill that and occasionally and make a little bit of income on that. And I think there's quite a bit coming up in the next year.
Sorry, I had one more. Way down on page 58, I noted that there, if this is the recommendation, that you'll need to get TCC contract manager to get in touch with Aon to get the application forms. It seemed like that was sort of an action that's way down in the papers. Is that something we're deciding on?
No. That is what we've given you through that, just to try and be as transparent as possible. That's our internal information that we keep, desk files that we keep in around insurance. So what we have is each time you go out for a contract tender, one of the things that you consider is insurance and the level of, so it's the contract manager that's aimed at. So when they go out to do a project, they make a decision around the whether they're going to do. You can either do principal applied contract insurance or get the contractor to do the contract insurance. So that's around trying to help the contract managers within TCC. We provide, Kat and I provide advice back to them about under what circumstances we might look at principal applied contract insurance, which is where that is where TCC actually takes out the insurance for itself, and that then means obviously when we go out to tender, we don't need the contractor to have that insurance in place. So that is, it's not a decision for council at all. It's a decision that individual contract managers make about each contract.
If I could just add, we are looking at whether we
can do that as a broader policy decision. So to avoid doing it contract by contract, is there financial benefit of having a broader policy on it?
I think the other thing for council to consider is, as a deep dive, we talk about the culture of conservatism. When we have large capex programs, if we have a large issue with one project, say a car park, what happens is that down the line, teams become more careful because they remember that we may not have had the cover, and so then we look at our risk transfer controls differently. But an appetite setting exercise to understand what the market offers, what sort of projects we have coming up, can be a very useful very useful for staff as they work out what levels of cover they need for their projects.
Sorry, one more on page 60. You've said that we go through a tender process with the broker every 5 years. The last one was 2019, which I think is more than 5 years ago.
Coming up for renewal this year, so it's a decision, and again, it's a BOPLAS decision, so it's not a decision that would be made by TCC alone. That would be something that BOPLAS would then go through and first of all decide if they're going to tender, because there are extensions. You can create automatic. There's I think it was originally 5, but it's 2 plus 2 plus 2. So I think there's still a decision that the current contract could just be extended, or they will decide to go out to tender. But that's something that will happen this year.
And will we get any updates on, will we be asked for feedback in terms of what they're doing on our behalf?
We can certainly play our role as a shareholder in influencing and guiding that decision, absolutely.
Please do.
Mayor Drysdale.
So,
yeah, on page 53, just 1.5, which is the professional indemnity cover. Just interested to understand this. Obviously, we've got this 15 million up to 160 million, and then just notice that exclusions as leaky buildings, for example, and just talks specifically about the Cayman apartments, that the leaky building issues had no insurance cover, but the building defects exposed, was covered. Can you just give us a bit of an idea of that? Because and I guess with that quantum of 160 million, if we can't have leaky buildings, what would ever go into that sort of phase?
Okay, so my understanding with the Cayman apartments, which isn't strong, is that there was a whole raft of effects. Some of those were due to the leaky buildings and materials, and some of the damage that happened was, I guess, outside that. It is the outstanding issue.
I'm just wondering if we're balancing around confidential.
Not necessarily. I think the division is there's been numerous court cases, and I think the most recent one was August 2023, to understand whether or not building defects were subject to insurance as opposed to the impact of a leak in a building. And so things like structural and fire treatment of buildings were seen as building defects, and the court cases have decided that insurance companies are liable for the payment of those structural defects, as opposed to the leaky building component of it. And so there's this lengthy process that goes on when there's a leaky building claim to try and distinguish between what is leak related and what's structural related. And so there's been a dance for the last 2 decades on this, and there's been tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars spent negotiating and working out these claims. So hopefully that explains.
And this is the risk pool claim. So we were talking before about the potential call that we'll have on risk pool. That's specifically around this issue. Sorry, not this issue, but it is those sort of claims that have, in the court cases Marty was just talking about, is what's going to potentially require us to make a call.
Changing tack back to the risk reserve, I appreciate the draft annual plan is in flux at the moment as we move to greater certainty next month. Within the current iteration of the draft annual plan, is a contribution to the risk reserve budgeted? Is that at sort of historic levels? This is going to be a multi-pronged thing. So, have we got a budgeted contribution this coming financial year? There was a statement that the risk reserve is at zero balance or thereabouts at the moment. When was the last call, roughly, on that risk reserve? You don't have to give me the day or the month, but the last call on the risk reserve. And has there been any conscious decision by governments to reduce contributions to that reserve in the last sort of 5 years?
Through the chair, some I may need to come back to you in terms of dates. But as a general principle, we have $1 million going to the risk reserve at the moment. The balance of the reserve at the end of this financial year is expected to be just under $5 million in terms of the total. In terms of end of June this year, that's correct. In terms of calls on that reserve, they've very much been around leaky buildings. There's been the large calls, but I'll have to get exact timings and dates in terms of what that looks like. The reserve did go into a negative balance for a period of time, and because of the size and scale of some of those settlements, it was separated out to fund the liability around leaky homes separate to the actual risk reserve going forward, because otherwise we just have a negative reserve
Yeah.
forever effectively within there. So that's the short history, but I can bring back more detail on.
And that 1 million contribution level, that sounds familiar. So I think that's been
look,
ongoing,
it has fluctuated over years. Again, it's one of the, it's a conversation around balance sheet versus affordability that happens. Is the reason for putting it into the reserve effectively is to recognise that risk exists now and the intergenerational cost effectively of it. But it does come at a cost, obviously, and that it has moved over the years.
No, I was going to ask for some information that wasn't really going to add value, so I'll just control myself. Any further questions from other members of the committee? No, let's move to the recommendation to receive the report on page 46. In the minutes there will be a number of actions, so I'm satisfied we don't need to deal with that by resolution. Can I have a mover? Councillor Schooler. Can I have a seconder? I said I'll do it, so I'll second it. Any debate? Nope. I will put that. All those in favour please say aye. To the contrary, no. I declare that carried.
Thank you.
For those following at home, let's move to page 62, which is the Lagoima privacy request, combined quarter 1 and 2 report. Favourite of mine, Catherine Norris and
Catherine Norris.
Coral. Yeah, they're able to answer questions on Lagoima. Over to you, Kath. Thank you.
This is the first. Oh, sorry. Oh, it says it's on. No, it wasn't. Green doesn't mean on. Oops, sorry. Good morning, everyone. So this is the first report you will have seen from us. So it's a combined 6-monthly report. So there's a few numbers in there. So highlights of the increase that we're seeing in Lagoima, and that is, we have a new council, and that's to be expected. So there's a new range of priorities. So therefore, people get interested in what's been spoken about, what's coming to meetings. So we see Lagoima's coming in to do that. We also have seen quite a significant increase in CCTV requests. So we're doing those now because there's a privacy element that's really important with the release of any video information. So it's car crashes and people understanding how to go around roundabouts correctly without changing lanes. So it's those types of things. There'll be sometimes there'll be altercations, and so there'll be police investigations as well. So we help out with that. So it's the old bell curve. So primarily we get all of our Lagoima, and they may take up to about 2 hours is probably the average. However, we can go from 5 minutes to 160 hours depending on the amount of information that we're looking at, that we have to retrieve and look at to provide. We've been managing the increase in requests relatively well, but we're pretty busy, so it's been an interesting last 2 quarters really. It's quite difficult to specify themes, because the vast majority of requests we get are actually someone who has a particular issue that they'd like to ask about. So can be quite difficult to group the themes, although there will have been, if I think, for example, Marine Precinct, which we've folded under council expenditure, we had 17 requests. There was a lot of obviously communications, media interest, so things like that. Boat ramps was another one. As you were debating what we were going to do with those, so we would get requests around that. We have a number of individuals who ask us multiple requests. They have multiple requests with us, and they aren't always about the same thing, but sometimes they can be re-asking of information, sometimes in slightly different ways, but essentially the same kind of information. So, yeah, we've had a few of those. Those are probably the highlight. It's probably easier for you to ask me questions. You will have read the report, so please feel free.
Any questions of the committee? Councillor Schooler.
Thank you, Kath. And just, so you said Marine Precinct was where on the pie chart?
We've put it under council expenditure, so where we've got common themes of requests.
Okay. Just looking at the request groups. Mm-hmm. So Marine Precinct, where would that come under that? Or is this who the requests are coming from?
So it's just the theme that we group. So we try and work out what a theme is for each of the requests. So because a lot of that was about costs, so a large part of that would have been through the Chief Finance Officer and his group.
Any additional questions from committee? Councillor Crowther.
Can you clarify what's the threshold for charging, and how is that determined? Like, is that sort of an approximate calculation of hours, and then you have a threshold, or is it more variable?
We have a charging policy which sets out a threshold of 5 hours. However, it is a case by case basis, and it will there'll be a range of factors that we might look at. We will look at things like, is it in the wider public interest? That is not a matter that may be interesting to the public, but it's got to be a broader public interest test. We'll potentially look at the number of requests that we've had from that requester on the same subject matter. It also, so we have we have to keep a spreadsheet. We just don't make up the numbers. We actually do the work to find the numbers. So we'll do the data searches of all of our systems, find out the numbers, and then work an approximate. It can't be accurate at that time, and we'll based on those numbers. So. We can't charge for collating it all, but yeah, so those are the things that we primarily look at when we charge. The other thing we must always, before any charging happens, we must go back to the requester and ask them to refine their request, so they get an opportunity to negotiate with us around what they're asking for. And sometimes, for example, someone might ask for 5 years worth of information, so we might go back and say, well, you might be looking at a charge for that. Is there a way that you could refine it and maybe reduce that time period, which has an impact on any charging?
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
I'm just thinking, like, I don't know how much benchmarking you do, but I noticed that Bay of Plenty Regional Council and some of our other councils sort of that might be seen as comparable have a much more generous, if I can use that term, approach to people who take lagoimas. And I think it's fair to say that TCC has sort of now got a reputation for being quite strongly limiting and charging proactively. Has there been a conscious sort of policy decision to do that because of the volume of lagoimas being stronger at Tauranga City Council? And if so, have you done any analysis to look at whether the provision of information proactively is the driver for that?
I think our stats wouldn't necessarily support that. We've only actually... Oh, sorry. I'm out of practice. We've actually only charged one person, so I'm not sure that that's quite accurate. So, but in saying that, we haven't benchmarked against other councils. We follow the Ombudsman's guidance around this, and in my view, I think we work on the principle of it's public information, and that's our first principle of availability. So that's where we start, and we then move into the public interest test and then further down. I think that the other thing is that we've seen an increased number of repeat requests on similar topics. That's also driving some of these decisions as well. But from my perspective, it's a very considered approach, and it's not our first default either, ever.
Thank you for that. I just note that the reason for only one charge was not the number of requests for charges, it was just the number of people who ended up wishing to pay thousands of dollars for the charges. That's probably the distinction I've made there.
Any further questions? Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. At the end of your report there, Kath, there's a little section on investigations, and you may have mentioned it, but without going into detail, because I presume there's confidentiality on some of this stuff, is it a regular occurrence, and what are the consequences for us if something is upheld and we've done something wrong?
We actually do pretty well with our investigations. So often what happens is the Office of the Ombudsman will do a preliminary, like a preliminary investigation, and ask us to have a look at the decisions that we've made. We have had one that's come back to it, which was we did muck up and we missed a request completely. So we reduce it. So what happens is then we, go and address that and fix it and respond. We've had, here's an example of the type of thing that they might look at. We've had a complaint made to the Ombudsman about some goats living next door to someone in the community. And our animal services team responded, and then we had a second complaint which is about sheep living on this same person responding. So they came to us and asked what we did as a response to those complaints, and so we had animal services that did exactly as they should have, investigated, it was all sorted. So what will happen is we provide a response that goes back to the Ombudsman. The Ombudsman will generally then make contact with the person who's complaining and decide whether they're going to do any more. In that instance, they didn't do anything more because there was nothing. We have had, I'm just trying to think of the things we've done wrong. One finding that went against us was we were a day late outside the 20 days. And so we had to address that. We'd made the response, so we had to make an apology to that requester. They have been looking at things like our consultation process. And one of those came back, there was nothing to be found that council had done wrong. Or in our response as well. So sometimes they're looking at the decisions, and then sometimes they're looking at the way we respond to a lagoima. Have we met all our statutory obligations? So there's a really wide range, so you're never quite sure sometimes what you might be getting from the office.
Chief Executive?
Yeah, there's generally two main categories of complaints. One's about process and timing, and the other is around the release or not of information, and so with every lagoima response, if there is a clause in that, if people aren't happy with the decision to release or redact information, then their default is through the Ombudsman. So to a degree, that's their first port of call if they're not happy with the way the organisation's interpreted a response and responded. So there's probably quite a large percentage of the responses that we do, particularly the sensitive ones, that we would get legal advice on as well. And so it's not as if we're making those decisions in isolation, to our own views or thoughts. There's a legal threshold that we'd have an internal external lawyer look at. So.
Councillor Schooler.
Going away from Lagoimas, just I guess CCTV requests and which is interesting information, but what risk do we have, obligation or liability in when we CCTV is on TCC property? Is there a obligation on that? Are there risks associated with the fact that we've got CCTV that can record private events? How do we manage the risk side of having CCTV on TCC property, please?
All CCTV, if there's any there's signage, so everybody, it's publicly available information, so everyone will know. Well, I know people don't go around reading signs, but there's always signage to say that this particular area is covered by CCTV.
Which means that anything you do in there is public anyway. Cool. Right, thank you.
Okay, I don't detect any further questions, so we'll go to resolution. Thank you, staff. Thank you, Kath. The recommendation is on page 62. Do we have a move for that? Moved by Mayor Drysdale, seconded by Councillor Schooler. Any debate? Yep. Mayor Drysdale.
Thank you, staff, and thank you, Kath, for the report. I guess just some of the comments. We have made it clear that we want a transparent council. That this information that is coming through this is to be made public, where appropriate, and I think staff have indicated that they're going to look at the settings and trying to get as much information released as possible. Just a note: a lot of the Lagoimas we get, the information is already publicly available on our website, and there is a cost to our council for every Lagoima request. So it's really just firstly try to find the information yourself before coming to us, because and hopefully as we go forward, the information that we are going to be as transparent as possible. So we hope to see the need for Lagoima be decreased, but I think I'm very supportive of the work I've seen so far, in the fact that we do try to release the information that we can, but I'd like to have a further lens on that around making sure that if we do redact anything or anything, it's absolutely necessary, because it is ultimately all public information. So yeah, that's sort of the steer, I guess, going forward, and look forward to hopefully seeing less and less of these requests as they become less and less necessary.
Do you wish to speak? No. I'll speak to it very briefly. It's a science, and I know the team has to is very diligent in terms of redacting and not redacting as appropriate, but I would reflect on something, an official information request, which is the parallel process which goes to ministers, and I recall receiving an Official Information Act response from the minister's office where they were a bit casual in terms of their redactions of names, and so the names of people were redacted to protect the innocent, but their email addresses weren't. So it wasn't very good. But we'll now put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? I declare that carried. Let's move to the final agenda item in the public section of the meeting, which begins on page 66 of the agenda. It's the Health, Safety and Wellbeing Quarterly Report. We have Tracy Benjamin, and the Senior Exec is Alistair McNeil. Thank you.
And Jan Pedersen, Head of
Hi, Jan. Welcome, Jan. Good to see you.
I'll hand over to the team.
Hi, so I am Tracy Benjamin. I'm the Health, Safety and Wellbeing Manager here, and as Alistair pointed out, I'm supported by Jan Pedersen, the Head of People, Performance and Culture. So overall, I just thought first meeting, I just wanted to state that we do have a very positive safety culture here at Council, and we just, as my team, continuously try to improve and find more efficiencies. So I wanted to take this report as read. I do have a couple of points I can highlight per page, but otherwise please feel free to jump in with any questions. So on the first page we did have our OCP stats there. So I just wanted to call out that the 14% service uptake with OCP in our numbers, it only equates to 176 people out of our 1200. So while it does look to be higher than a national average, it still seems like quite a low number, and that national average is just benchmarked against our one service provider. So that's just against OCP.
And for clarity, OCP is the name of
the provider.
Sorry,
isn't it?
yes. Was there any further questions on that page?
Yeah, TriStar.
You say that's only against OCP's number. Do you have a quantum? Is that 2 councils or 10 councils or?
Not at this stage, but I can certainly find that out.
Okay.
It's not just councils though. Other organisations use OCP,
Oh, no.
so it's something my previous organisation certainly used, and the Environmental Protection Agency, which I'm on the board of, also uses it. So it's quite a wide.
Okay.
It'll be a wide benchmark of people.
Yeah.
So my question on that page, and these are really good stats. Thank you. In a previous organisation, we were also reported the length of service that the requests, what are they called, requests were coming from. So it was actually to be able to, which was quite a good indicator to show that people early on in their careers at TCC were doing the majority of the calls, or it's those that have been in a longer time. So that was just a dashboard addition that I think the information must be there because it's the same provider, but that would be good to know because, you know, I think, and I've got another question about the churn and what is our churn of the organisation and how's that changed over time. But I think, Alistair, you commented at that meeting recently that only X% of this organisation have been there more than 3 years, and I couldn't remember what that was. So those are stats that would be really good to have. Sorry, I've 3 questions.
No, I think we are interested in making this report really authentic and getting it right based on what your information needs are. And I recall you mentioning, I think it was the EPA or somewhere, you're getting a really great report. And if we can use some of those data points, turnover, length of service, anything that you've got there, we'd love to, if the EPA is prepared to share, we'd love to use a copy.
Yeah, I'm going to ask them at my next board meeting.
Just to answer the question on when people go to get counselling, we don't get them to provide that level of detail. It's important that they go there in an anonymous way. So, yeah, it's something we don't ask in terms of our counselling service, but yeah, Alistair's right, our average tenure is about 3.5 years. So yeah, and we certainly turnover stats, we're about 9% and declining at the moment.
That would be great to get over a couple of years. We've been looking at employee costs over since I think COVID, so they would be really good stats to know. And it's just you do so much, you know, your what are you calling it when you're looking at your people? What's that called?
We could call it succession? Or
No. When you do your survey.
Oh, My Team Pulse.
Yeah, the pulse survey. That's, you know, like we hear about that, but also just to understand over time what's happening with churn. And yeah, so, but it's if you can analyse what the reasons people are making the call for, then the length of service, that's quite personal, I would have thought, versus how long you've been at TCC.
Yeah, we generally have 2 categories, which is work-related or non-work related. So that's, you know, the sort of questions that counsellors would ask. And that's what we report on.
Was this information provided by OCP?
Yes.
Yep. Yep. So they could provide... Okay, I'll leave that.
Any further questions, committee?
On page 1.
Page 1, other colleagues? No. I'm sure OCP would have it, and so it's not something that would burden the organisation team, but the number of EAP calls over time may be an interesting statistic, because as different stresses occur in the organisation, we can keep a monitor on that. The question I have is around how is this employee assistance program publicised? Obviously at induction, obviously on the intranet somewhere, but are there other mechanisms that this is shown, the availability is shown to the team?
So yes, it is publicised on Insider, so our intranet. We have just posters around the office for people to see on specific occasions. If we think it might be warranted, people leaders can introduce it to their staff as well. So we can direct, would never enforce, but we can certainly tell them the options there.
And OCP, do they offer on-site services sometimes? Yeah.
Yes, so we have used that in the past, dependent on the situation. When we think it's warranted during a group session for grief counselling or something, we might bring that in.
Thank you. Let's move to the second page.
Thank you. So on the second page, so there is a few stats there which if you've got any questions on, but I just wanted to highlight that assault and antisocial behaviour is our leading risk category that comes through our analysis. This is primarily affecting our front-facing staff, so that's those aggressive customer interactions. So we do investigate all incidents and implement corrective actions as required when they come up.
A question for myself, just in terms of the near miss category.
What's the uptake in the organisation? That's something which is really, it's quite common to just not report it, but how's the reporting of near misses at Tauranga City Council in your experience?
It is more education. You'll get some people just put it under incident, so it's just trying to train them on which category it can fall under. So we do get a lot of near misses reported, which is very positive, but sometimes we just have to fix the data in the background to make sure it's shown in the right area.
Thank you. Just in terms of hours worked on that slide, how are you collecting that? Is that I'm sure not everyone's timesheeted.
No, so I did have one of my very fabulous colleagues helped me pull that data, and it is just our casual hours and working days, our fixed term employees over the working days, and then they add on casual hours and the people that are timesheet. And so you will find, like over the summer months, Christmas shutdown periods, that's why the numbers will drop down over the year.
Sorry, it's just so assuming that people are on 37-hour week are working 37 hours.
So about 40 hours a week, and then just less leave and everything in the system.
You will see the graph has dipped through that December, January, and that's reflective of the holiday season.
I just want to go back. I reported a near miss when on my bike I was nearly hit by a council truck, and I have found out how the process went, and I don't know if it was reported at that end, but I didn't ask, but it was very positive in terms of it was reported there was a process that was gone through and a remedy or a mitigation has been put in place. So from my side, that was a well done in terms of a near miss from the organisation, but I didn't ask whether the person that nearly hit me reported it or not, so it was yeah.
Thank you for going out of your way, Deputy Mayor, to test the system. It's very appreciated. Yeah.
Was that a recent thing?
Okay. No further questions on that slide. I would just have one question for the Health, Safety and Wellbeing Manager. What keeps you up at night in terms of the biggest risk of injury, if we're focusing in on the injury element, at this organisation, and what sort of controls are we putting in place from your perspective, and maybe what do we need to tighten up on?
Great question, Councillor Morris. Probably for me it's the uncontrolled factors, and it's purely because they're uncontrolled. So we can do all the training, we can put in crime prevention activities, we can design our workplaces, but there are public that we can't control. There are people that just walk in and can just with a word ruin someone's day, and that is so frustrating that you can't, with all of these measures in place, you just can't control some factors. And so it's just constantly finding new ways. How do you build resilience? How do you make sure that workplace is designed correctly? How do we make sure people have got the right equipment, the tools and what they need to feel safe and secure?
Chief Executive, I noticed you pulled the microphone closer.
Yeah,
It's a sign.
I'm not sure whether we're going to talk about due diligence as part of this project. Sorry, getting ahead. But I think it's interesting to note that the risk profile of the organisation in terms of health and safety has changed over the last couple of years with the introduction of the city operations team. So whilst we did have operational components in our water treatment plants and obviously our contractors out on the road, we now have another 100 or so staff out there doing physical manual work with machinery on a daily basis, and so that's the reason why there is a specific person assigned to support and work with that team.
Councillor Scully, you get it.
Well, I can indulge the meeting with a little example. This morning, biking here, I was unable to use the bike lane because there was a great big truck in it, and I went past and I thought actually I should take a photo, and the truck was parked in the bike lane to protect the 7 city ops people that were weeding the garden. And I went back to the truck driver and said, how am I meant to get here? And while I was there, 2 other bikes had to come off the bike lane onto the road, quite busy, Cameron Road, and I said, why are you in the bike lane? He said, talk to council. They said I'm allowed to be here. So so I sort of thought, well, hang on a minute. Yes, we're protecting the 7 workers that are going to be there every 6 weeks weeding those gardens, but we've forgotten that we actually might have a bike accident because the trucks are parked in the bike lane. So I think there's a lot of...
Did you get a license plate?
I took a photo.
You did?
Yeah.
Have you shared it with someone?
I was just this morning. It was, it was an hour ago.
That's something that's important to us that we follow up when.
I don't think they can do anything else because they have.
But the way they respond, we can. So.
He said, "Talk to council." I said, "I am council."
I am the Senate. It kind of goes through.
This sounds like one of those delicate dances around trying to effectively manage traffic and do it in such a way that is practical. Without having an insinuated truck there and 5,000 road cones and all this sort of thing. It is a delicate dance.
And I'm grateful, Councillor School, for raising it because whilst it's a situation sort of ingested as it is serious as well, and I appreciate the example. Thank you. No, comment on it. You can make a question.
Okay. Yeah. I was just to provide input that I know that Cycle Action Tauranga, when they existed, and Bike Tauranga have deep concerns around that issue. So I guess my question is, have you engaged around health and safety with those kind of organisations? Because that is not just an isolated incident. There are a number of times when I personally have seen exactly that scenario, and it's been raised with council, but I don't know if it's been located just in the transport team. So is that something you've proactively looked at in terms of who you engage with in the community around these issues? So that was a question.
That was a great question, thank you.
Yeah, so through the chair. So we do, through multiple measures, we try and approach these situations. So yes, our transport team will be able to pick up a lot on the network and put their recommendation and expertise in. And then it's through individualised teams risk assessment. So when you're doing a task in these areas, what do we need to factor in? So if my team can't answer the full details, that's when we reach out to the transport networks or go external as required and start writing further procedures. Just consider ways to keep the delicate dance, as Marty nicely put it. Yeah.
Do you want to
comment on both the final slides together to the end of the report, and then we can take all questions for the remainder at the end.
So yes, thank you, Councillor Morris. We do have due diligence. So I thought each time I present I could put a section in here on due diligence just to help support your roles in that area. So obviously under the Health and Safety at Work Act, an officer is someone with significant influence over the business, and while the roles of elected members are considered officers, it is important to note you can't be prosecuted for failing to meet officer duties because you're under the Local Government Act. But with your influence, we obviously highly encourage you undertake your due diligence activities. And then on the last page as well, so it's kind of represented on our events page going back to slide 2, but just calling out that assault and violence is one of our leading risk categories here at Council, primarily driven by those customer-facing interactions, but I will be able to go further into critical risks as we move through these committees, as we can say the plant and machinery and everything, that the different risks that we have here.
Any final questions from committee or non-committee members? No, thank you very much for the report. Can I please ask for a mover for the recommendation on page 66, Councillor Schooler? I'll second that. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor?
Only to say that from our perspective, really good to get the information. Thank you, and we recognise as well that you know, the staff are a big part of TCC and delivery, and we want safe and well and healthy people to be in this organisation. So yeah, we're supportive, but it's really good to get the data. Thank you.
Any further discussion, Mayor Drysdale?
Oh yeah, thank you for the report. Obviously, health, safety and wellbeing are key components to our organisation. I think what we've heard today is it's to our organisation, but also to our people. And we've got to consider that alongside it. I guess my view of health and safety, especially out in the community, is we have to take a pragmatic approach. We have to use common sense because as we've heard today from the Deputy Mayor, that was one example, but we don't want to go the other way either, where we have 2 trucks, 7 people, and a whole traffic management system to weed a garden. So we have to just try to strike that balance. Where we're trying to mitigate some of those risks, but also not adding a lot of cost and unnecessary, mitigations to these things. So I think it's quite a fine line trying to balance it, but ultimately we want everyone to be safe and well within our community. So that is ultimately our number one task, but we need to take that pragmatic and common sense approach to it.
Speaking to the resolution on the table, I think, and again it's subject to the guidance of the independent chair when we get an independent chair, but I'd like the health, safety and wellbeing report up the front of the agenda. I think it's important that it's there, and I think it sends a good message to our team that it is right top of mind. So in future, if we can have that up right at the top of the agenda, that would be great. And as Mayor and Councillors, we need to consider, like we did with the risk appetite around insurance or in risk in general terms, whether we are comfortable that we are fulfilling our duties as a person conducting a business or undertaking. I do reflect that it's very interesting that many central government politicians end up in local government, and perhaps there's a reason why legislation was written in such a way that the only PCBU that can't be prosecuted is a member of local government. So I'll now put the resolution. All those in favour please say aye. To the contrary, no. Declare that carried. There are no late items, but what we'll do now is we will close the public part of the meeting, and then we will have a break for 10 minutes, and then we'll come back in public excluded. But we won't, for those listening online, we won't be coming back to close the meeting after the public excluded. We'll conclude the open business now, and we'll be back at 11:30.
Resolve to go into public excluded now.
Please, yeah. Kind of, moved by Councillor Stewart, we move into public excluded, seconded by Mayor Drysdale. Procedural motion, put that. All those in favour, please say aye. To contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you. We'll break now for 10 minutes.